She had finished her wine, and Jonathan refilled her glass. She took a long sip, gratefully. It happened so fast. I wasn't ready for it. Things went slowly at first, some phone calls, a few lunch meetings, or having a coffee together. We talked like you and I didn't anymore. He was easy to talk to. He wanted to go to dinner, but I couldn't. I was a married woman. There's a difference between a lunch and a dinner. I offered to cook him a meal. It was a little weird at first, in a strange kitchen, not knowing where anything was. A little exciting, if I'm honest. I still had no romantic feelings, he was just a friend. Jonathan filled his own glass. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't need a blow-by-blow. He just wanted her to tell him what was wrong with their marriage, that she had to screw another man for a year, not this sappy, whining monologue about friendship. Men don't want women for friends, he knew that. The slimy scumsucker intended to get into his wife's pants from the very beginning. He wanted to shake her and explain it to her, make her understand the poor, pitiful me act, playing on her mothering instincts. Instead, he tried to stay calm, nodding occasionally. After that, it became easier to go to his house than out in public. It was private, and we could talk more openly. Plus, I didn't want anyone to get ideas about us. We were just friends. She looked at him hopefully, that he might understand. Go on, Jonathan said. It felt so good to be able to talk it out. Surely, he would understand now. This was all they needed, a little time for him to get over the shock, to let his male ego take a backseat. Once he understood why, it would all be fine. I helped him around the house, he was so disorganized. Cleaned a little, helped rearrange things. He let everything go after his wife's accident. We talked more, we could talk about anything. Sometimes we talked about our wants and needs, then some more about our desires, our fantasies, things we had done or wanted to do. It wasn't about sex, it was about communication, sharing, understanding. He was seducing you, Jonathan blurted, not meaning to say the words. She looked surprised. No, never. He was a friend, someone who needed me and who I needed. Good friends can talk about things like that, that was all. He's not like that. Jonathan bit his lip, waiting. If he opened his mouth, the entire night's effort would be wasted. He tilted the bottle up and poured the last of it into her glass. It just happened. I was in the kitchen, and then we were kissing. I know I should have stopped it, but it was a kiss between friends, then suddenly it wasn't. I don't even know how I ended up in his bedroom. Her hand was shaking as she sipped her wine. She looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes. I never meant for it to happen. I felt horrible. I came home and showered, scrubbing, but I could never get myself clean. I had cheated for the only time in my marriage, and I hated myself for it. I knew you'd see it in my eyes, but you only grabbed a beer and sat on the couch. You didn't ask me, didn't see the guilt. I wondered if you even cared. She drank down half her wine. I tried to end it, he called, and I told him to stop. I avoided him, not going anywhere we used to go. I swore to myself I'd never do anything like that again, and I'd make it up to you. Then I heard he was in the hospital from an overdose of sleeping pills, and I knew it was because of me. I'd almost killed him. I went to him to help him, but we promised each other that it could never happen again. I'm so sorry, Jonathan. I tried to stop it, I swear I did. I felt so bad seeing him slipping away again. Jonathan was furious at his stupid, gullible wife and that slimy predator. Overdose, my bum, he thought. A few pills, a call to the hospital, and he had her back after she resisted his efforts. Jonathan took the empty glass from her and placed it on the bedside table. She was sobbing, and he drew her into his arms, holding her. If she'd only talked, then this could have all been avoided. He could have forgiven her one stupid mistake. He was fairly certain he could. But a year of adultery, demanding that she be allowed to keep seeing that slimeball, threatening him, no, that he couldn't accept. She'd pay, they'd both pay. He guided her down to the bed. She whimpered when he let her go, but all he did was turn off the lights. He pulled her close, holding her, letting his hands caress her body, slowly becoming more intimate, moving from her sides and shoulders to her chest, in all the ways that excited her. She sat up and pulled her shirt off, lying naked in their bed. She turned to him, reaching out. He braced himself for the more intimate contact. He was torn, he was disgusted with her, but her body was something he knew so well, had pleasured him so many times. It was tainted now, but still enthralling. He eased her backward, leaning over her. He couldn't kiss her, that filthy, lying, cheating mouth of hers. He pressed his lips to her neck, right where it excited her most. In only a few minutes, she was pressing back desperately. He pulled his hand away, hearing the sharpness of her breath, smelling her need. The thrill of it all, it cuddled against her, putting his arm around her, holding her. "Love me, Jonathan, please." "It's been too long," she whispered. "No, baby, I won't be second to him." "I can't do that," she reached for him. "You are never second. I love you, you're my husband, you're first, he's second. My nights are yours, they've always been. You spent 2 nights in his bed, I have no doubt that once I'm at work, you'll be screwing him again. I get a few moments with you, but he can spend all the time with you, pampering you, telling you how wonderful you are, stealing you away from me. I can't do it, honey, it hadn't been a problem for over a year now. You don't even have to know when I'm here with you, I'm only yours." He had tried, damn how he tried. The words were like knives, filling him, opening him. He released her and rolled away from her onto his side. "I'm married, I'm cheating." Susan didn't understand, couldn't understand what had just happened. He'd been so good, loving, understanding, then to shut down like that, why couldn't he just love her, make love to her? Nothing had changed. She moved to him, wrapping her arms around his wide body. He was so strong, made her feel small, feminine. She felt him tense up, and she felt a pang of guilt. What if she had stopped back then, after that first time? She sighed, too late for that now. She had to make him understand, nothing would change. It could be good again, maybe even wonderful again, like it had been in the beginning. Her hand reached around to his waist, and he shuddered when her fingers wrapped around his hardness. "Please, Jonathan," she whispered, "I know you want me. I'm here for you, I'll always be here for you, never again." "So long as you're seeing him," Jonathan said coldly, rolling away from her onto his stomach. Susan turned away from him, the rejection painful. She didn't even try to hold back the tears as she cried herself to sleep. The next morning, Jonathan was up bright and early. It was the dawn of a new day, and he no longer felt out of control. He had confronted both his wife and her lover about their behavior, insisting it end. He started down a path to help ensure it stopped, with the help of his family and friends. That included quitting his old job and going back to work on the family ranch. It also meant early hours. Susan was still in bed when he headed downstairs for a quick breakfast. He oddly wondered if she'd run off and screw her boyfriend that day. At the ranch, Uncle Lynn introduced him around. Most of the people he already knew. He was told his responsibilities and put under the direction of old Miguel, who'd been working with the family for a good 20 years. Uncle Lynn sent word down for him to come to the house for his lunch break. There was a big spread set out, and he was smiling when he saw his grandfather and friends waiting for him. He gave them a quick 10-minute update on the weekend, the discussion with his mother and his wife's family, the visit to the casino, glossing over the female companionship he'd found. He reviewed his actions with his wife, in the confrontation with the scum mucker. The grandfather spoke when he was finished. "You should know, the Grey Brigade is making this their personal project." "Grey Brigade?" Jonathan asked. "The senior center, all the retirees. A little excitement in their lives. If the little 304 keeps it up, she's going to be hearing about it, that's for damn sure." M. Johnson lives across the street a couple of doors down from the scum mucker, Carl Jenkins said. "Her daughter works at the store. She'll be keeping an eye on the house, anyone coming and going. Her and her sister will know about it, the judge laughed. Her parents are getting an earful as well. So sad to hear the kind of woman your daughter turned out to be. Is that why your other daughter moved away? I'm glad I'm not on their bad side, Jonathan's grandfather said. You need to talk to the bank, John. Get all your contact information moved to my house. When you get behind on payments, we don't need them calling your house and your 304 wife getting wind of it, his grandfather said. The judge had some papers out, the guy's wife, the dead woman, her name was Heather. I've got some pictures buried in the Methodist cemetery. Pretty ugly. He was thrown clear of the car, she was stuck inside. She might have been killed in the impact, but the car caught fire and she was burned to the point where she was barely recognizable. The suit he won was about that. The vehicle had a history of catching fire in accidents. Jonathan nodded, some good information he could work with. Thank you, sir. No problem. We take care of our own, his grandfather replied. He had his directions, hot and cold, to his wife. Start the program against the scum sucker, continue to protect the assets, move all financial contacts to Grandpa's house. By the end of the day, Jonathan was aching in places he didn't even know he had. It felt good to be working outdoors and to be around old friends. He headed home, cleaned up, and went to work on his second job, his wife. That night, Rich Patton got a phone call from a blocked number. Hello, it burns, Richie. How could you let me burn like that? It hurts so bad, a quivering female voice whispered. He recalled laying on the hard asphalt, watching his car engulfed in flames, his young wife still inside. He dropped the phone, the words resurrecting his pain. Ah, the voice screamed on the other end of the line, still audible from where he was standing. No, you can't bring the kids over here for us to watch, Brenda snapped angrily. But Mom, I need to go out, Susan said. Take your kids with you, they're your damn kids, Susan. Everything takes so much longer with 3 children to take care of, she explained. What else do you have to do? It's not like you have a job or do much around the house anyway. You going to run after that scumbucker you're screwing, her mother sneered. He's not a scumsucker, he's a good man. You don't understand, Susan argued. I understand he's a low-life prick that's screwing another man's wife. God, you're such a disappointment to your father and I. We can't even walk around town without someone reminding us of what a 304 you've become, her mother said. Susan was shocked to hear nothing but a busy tone on the other end of the line. Max Schroeder sat at the table, addressing the group before him. They had the card room at the senior center, the door closed. More women than men, but all understood the situation. They'd already divided responsibilities, the phone lines would be burning up well into the night. The first pass had brought the Grey Brigade up to speed, the second pass was to start applying pressure to the next generation, make it clear what was acceptable behavior and what wasn't. Within days, the whole damn town would know. Cheating wasn't the issue, it happened. Hell, probably better than half the group had probably strayed a time or two, maybe more than a few times. But blatant disrespect, expecting a spouse to accept an ongoing affair, all but abandoning a family while expecting to be able to keep the rest of your life, your family, and friends, was too much to ask. No, they all agreed, it was unforgivable behavior on the part of both cheaters. Make up or break up, but not this disgusting Amir generation. They would be reminded, chided, insulted, and condemned wherever they went. No, that kind of behavior couldn't be allowed to spread. Responsibilities were divvied up, tasks assigned, options discussed and weighed. When the room had nearly emptied, the colonel sat with 5 associates. This is the ugly part. We all understand what's involved. The risk is lifelong, friends, all agreed they were up to the task. John Crum took the lead, copies of the keys to his house were passed out, straight from the wife's keychain to Jenkins' hardware, and then into the hands of the perpetrators. Pictures, articles, documentation, love letters, as much history as they could attain. Step 1 was to get more information. They'd received notice when he was out, the Grey network would keep tabs. Once they determined the window of opportunity was right, the first break-in would occur, and they'd collect as much intel as possible. Only then would the campaign of guilt go into full gear. A couple of them felt a little uneasy at what they were going to do, not enough to stop them. Susan parked in his garage, closing the door behind her quickly. She took off her hat and sunglasses, embarrassed that she was disguising herself. This was ridiculous. She had every right to see Rich. She entered the house through the garage and eagerly accepted his embrace. They didn't speak of anything other than missing each other as they retired to his bedroom, undressing quickly before falling into the bed together. Half an hour and 2 sessions later, he sat up, staring down at her. "How did you mess things up?" "Nobody down at the firm will even talk to me." Susan was stunned by his accusation. How had she messed things up? He uses her to get off, not even caring about her satisfaction after the night she'd given him. She confronted her husband alone, faced his anger and accusations, and now it's her fault? You wanted to stop hiding, wanted your overnight stays. It was your idea to tell him, force him to accept us, threaten him with divorce and the kids. How the hell did it become everyone's business? He snapped. I don't know, gossip, he told his family and mine. They're still barely speaking to me. Word must have spread. You were supposed to keep it private, just between the two of you. How do you know it was me, where I lived? Rich was livid with anger. How the hell do I know? I talked to him just like we discussed, told him how it was. You're the man, you should have known how he'd react. I'm not some Neanderthal who can't keep his woman. I'm supposed to remove half my brain to think like him? Susan could barely believe his words, the disrespect, the anger. Where did it come from? She started pulling on her clothing before she said something she'd regret. Rich reached out for her. Where are you going? We're not through. Already you just got here. It's been a week since we've been together. You shouldn't talk about Jonathan like that. He did nothing wrong. He's a good man. We're the ones who want to change the rules. Good man, starting rumors and gossip about us, ignoring you, disrespecting you. Where's the good in that? Rich snapped, standing between her and the door. She buttoned her blouse and combed her hair back with her fingers. Plenty of time to clean up when she got home. She was thankful that her mother-in-law accepted her excuse that she needed to pick up some job applications. I have to go. I'm going to be late. He moved toward her, pulling her into his arms. What about us, Sue? I miss you. We need some time together. Tell him you'll be spending the night over here. He already knows we need to reconnect. You're everything to me. You know how much I love you. I can't stand going days on end without you. I need you. She listened to his pleading, knowing it was true. Without her, he'd be retreating back to his old ways and nothing flat. She held his face in her hands, kissing him softly. We'll work something out. No overnights. What I tell the kids, drop them off at your parents' again, she sighed. It'll be a cold day in hell before they'll watch them again. They've made that abundantly clear. She started to pull away, but he clung to her, needy. Come over after they go to sleep. I need to feel you in my arms again as I fall asleep, wake up next to you, your smell in my head, your warmth beside me. Don't you want that? She nodded, but if she were honest with herself, she would admit she hated being apart from her children at night. She didn't sleep well in Rich's place. She smiled to herself. She didn't sleep much at all, come to think of it. It was like being a teen again. Let me think about it, okay? I've got to get things settled at home before making any more waves. How about a quick bee job before you go, to hold me over? His callous words stung her. Was that all she was to him? I have to go, Rich. I'm going to be late as it is. I can't afford to alienate my last babysitter. He was pushing her to her knees. You promised you'd never deny me, Susan. You said you loved me. I need this. It'll only take a few minutes. She refused to let the tears fall as she mechanically gave him a BJ, his hands in her hair, forcing his way. Max took the call from Matt, nearly 2 hours all told, the 304 spent with him sneaking around like a thief in the night. He called his daughter, berating her. "What the hell were you thinking, Carolyn? Watching the kids while she went to get laid?" She said she was looking for a job, picking up applications, and you believe the lying 304 after all. She's done? Carolyn was not happy when Susan showed up at her door 20 minutes late. She helped get the kids packed up and into the car before Susan could leave. Carolyn grabbed her arm. "Never again, you lying 304, using me to cover for your bum while you screw around on my son." Susan trembled at the harsh words. "I didn't. Save the lies for somebody else, you have sex. You could at least clean up before picking up my grandkids. What the hell is wrong with you?" In the battle for shame and anger, anger went out. "If you don't ever want to see the kids, that's fine by me. I didn't do anything wrong. You'll never have to watch them again. You'll be lucky to see them." Susan was rocked back on her feet when Carolyn's hand whipped across her face. "He's right, you're nothing but a 304. Jonathan sat with his grandfather after a long, hard day. The last thing he needed to hear about was his wife screwing around on him. "I don't want to know, Grandpa. Frankly, I couldn't care less. She had your mother watching the kids, said she was getting some job applications or some such nonsense." Jonathan's anger took hold until his hands were shaking. "Nobody watches my kids unless I say it's okay. Nobody, not you, not Mom, not even a neighborhood sitter. Don't blame your mother on this. She was trying to do the right thing. She has a right to see your grandkids. I don't blame her. It's the lying 304 under my roof. I'll talk to Mom myself." "Mom, what's a Jezebel?" Cindy asked. "A what?" Susan asked, surprised by her eldest's words. "Dana's grandma said you were a Jezebel." Susan felt her blood pressure rising. She had no right. The old witch had no right talking to her daughter like that. "It's nothing, baby," something old people say, but not in front of her daughter, if she could help it. No more play dates with Dana, that was for damn sure. Rich didn't notice the stares or whispered comments as he entered his old employer's office. It was good to maintain relationships, and his standing, monthly lunch outing was one way to do that. He waited in the lobby patiently. After 20 minutes, he realized something was wrong. As each new person exited the elevator, he'd see the looks, the whispers. None would hold eye contact. Something was up. He made a call. "Jean, I'm in the lobby for our lunch," he said. There was silence at the other end. "I don't think I'll be able to make it today. Something came up. I haven't seen Eric or Dan either. It's just not a good idea right now. Things are kind of hectic. Maybe some other time. I'm really busy. I have to go." Rich listened to the dead air on the other end of the line. A quick call to Eric fared no better. "We've had this standing lunch date for over 2 years, Eric." "What's going on?" He heard anger in the man's voice. "Your girlfriend. You led us to believe you guys were serious, getting engaged. You never said she was married with 3 kids. You used us to cover for you. We all feel like idiots now. My wife would kill me if I went to lunch with you." "No, I don't think we'll be going to lunch anytime soon." He looked up from the phone, feeling the eyes on him. He walked toward the revolving glass door, falling in with the crowd exiting the building. "Do a year she's married," he heard the whispers from in front of him. "Want to have your cake and eat it too. 3 kids," from behind. "2 million for killing his wife," echoed in his ears as he hurried down the sidewalk. Late summer was a hard time on the ranch, dawn to dusk most days, checking fences, working on the irrigation, moving herds from pasture to pasture. Almost time for the second hay cutting, which was breakneck while the weather held. Uncle Lynn still abided by Grandpa Max's ways for the most part. Ranching had become largely mechanized. Pickup trucks were replacing horses for a lot of the work. The stir still stood by the practice of driving as infrequently as possible, as short a distance as possible. Gas costs money. For much of the work, horseback was the way to go, especially when it came to moving the herds and the pasture checks. Jonathan had forgotten how sore a man could get riding a horse 10 hours a day, how tiring it was hauling around 40-pound packs, digging trenches, replacing fence posts. He was looking forward to the haying, which mostly involved driving around. Most ranch hands were jacks of all trades by necessity. A standard motto on the ranch was, "If it's broke, fix it." His experience with machines, engines, and anything mechanical was almost revered. No sending out the ranch vehicles for work. If it was broken, Jonathan could fix it. He might be rusty on the range, awkward herding strays, but his mechanical abilities and his willingness to do whatever the job took won the admiration of his fellow hands. He liked that. He went home each evening tired, sore, and hungry, but he couldn't remember being so satisfied with his accomplishments at the end of each day. It was only when he got home and had to face the anger, disrespect, and condemnation of his supposed wife and soulmate that he'd get down. He braced himself before entering his house each evening, reminding himself of his plans and purpose. It wouldn't last forever, he told himself. The first picture of a charred body was slipped under Rich's door sometime after he'd gone to bed. It was grisly, almost unrecognizable as human. Someone had written in white marker, "Heather Patton, burned to death, now burning in hell." His hands trembled as he picked it up. How could anybody do something so horrible, so heinous? Didn't they know how much he regretted it, how badly it hurt? It was an accident. It wasn't his fault. He loved her. He sat on the floor, sobbing, until he fell asleep. Susan was unloading the car of groceries. What should have been a simple 20-minute trip took over an hour. The kids had run inside, carrying a bag each. It had been a painful outing, seeing the glares, the looks of condemnation. Nobody would speak to her, but whispers followed her everywhere, barely containing laughter in some cases. "Hey, Susan," her nosy neighbor called out, almost running over. The last thing she needed. "Hello, Margie. So, what's he like, this young lover? Does he have a huge tool? Can he go all night? What's the scoop?" Susan felt her face blushing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, Susie, you can tell me. Everyone knows you and that young lawyer kid, the one who killed his wife. Isn't that scary exciting? Maybe you don't think he'd do that to you when he's done with you, do you?" Susan couldn't believe the bile that was pouring forth from the neighborhood gossip's lips. It was an accident, he didn't kill her. It sure paid off pretty good for an accident. "So, what is it?" Susan slammed the back of the car shut, turned, and entered her house without saying another word. Jonathan held her in his arms while she cried in their bed. He felt pretty good about how things were going. "What's wrong, baby?" "They're horrible. Everyone is horrible to me. They think I'm a 304. "You are a 304, he whispered. "Things will get better. You do what's right and ignore them. Why can't they understand? Haven't they ever been in love before? I can't help how I feel," she sobbed. Do you love me, Jonathan?" "I've always loved you, baby." His lips moved across her neck, nipping gently. "Love me, Jonathan, please," she begged. "God, I wish I could." "I want you so bad," he lied, his breath tickling her ear. "You can." "I haven't been with him, not since that last night." "I'm yours, honey," still lying. Em had reported seeing her at his place only a week ago, 3 hours there at least. She was lying about it, not throwing it in his face. "Progress of sorts, I'm afraid," he said softly. "I know you're not the only woman he's been with." "I don't know if he's given you anything, any disease," she tensed up. "How could you think that? You don't use a condom with him, do you?" Jonathan asked. I don't want to talk about it," she whined. "I can't be with you until I know you're clean. But we've been doing it for a year with no problems. Thanks for reminding me, 304. I was checked, I'm clean. It's not fair to risk the lives of both our children's parents." He's screwing other women, who knows what diseases they may have? He wouldn't do that, he loves me. You love me and you did it, Jonathan reminded her. Her hips were driving up against his hand and he could feel her getting close. He backed off, rubbing her gently. She groaned, her need evident. I'm your wife, Jonathan, make love to me, screw me, honey. He pulled her close, hugging her. How I wish I could, baby. Not until I know you're clean and done seeing him. The magazines started showing up, Miss Cosmo, Good Housekeeping, Southern Living, Homes and Gardens, all addressed to Heather Patton, a constant reminder. A large picture had been taped to his front door, her gravestone defaced under the words loving wife. Someone had written a murdered and replaced it with cheating 304. He tore the picture into little shreds and spent hours scrubbing the gravestone clean of the chalk message. Long after every speck of writing was gone, the police found him after being called and questioned him about his actions, threatening him for vandalism. He went berserk, screaming and crying, and had to be handcuffed before he calmed enough to explain. They checked his ID and compared it to the gravestone. One of the officers looked at him in distaste. Oh, you're the wife stealer, yeah, we know you. 3 days later, he was scrubbing her gravestone again. Yes, I got your previous messages. No, I can't make a payment. I've lost my job and I don't have the money. Marshri hung up, grinning. Third call in 2 weeks, things were definitely going according to plan. He looked at the picture in his hand, smiling. He'd give it to the boy after work, it should help. It didn't prove anything but should help sow the seeds of discontent. He examined the papers scattered across his kitchen table, sightings, comments made, background information retrieved from the scumsucker's house. A wealth of information. For Max, it was exciting, fun to have something to do, a new purpose, if only temporary. Righting a wrong, punishing the guilty. Those two were very, very guilty. Ranches don't shut down on weekends. Jonathan worked but brought his family with him. He lifted his eldest onto the saddle of the old quarter horse. Do you really think that's safe? Susan asked. Been doing it for 4 generations. Buttercup's a gentle horse, she'll take care of our girl. Cindy was glowing with pride, her hand petting the horse's mane, leaning over and talking to her. Jonathan took the bridle in his hand and started walking, watching his firstborn, seeing how she kept her balance, pushing on her knee to show her how to sit properly. He thought it was funny how the girls always took to riding so readily. After a few turns, he handed the reins to his baby girl and let her smile warm his heart. She was getting the hang of it already, shifting in the old western saddle, gliding along with the horse's movements. Your turn, he asked Susan. Me? Are you crazy? She asked. Come on, Susan, lighten up a little, try it with only a little goading. He had her up in a saddle, explaining things. She was nervous, far more nervous than Cindy had ever been. His daughter seemed like she lived in the saddle already. She steered her horse up alongside her mother, talking to her, laughing, until Susan relaxed enough to move along at more than a crawl. Jonathan slipped his foot into the stirrup and hauled himself up on the big grey with a cluck, a pat on the neck, and a press of the heels. He took off at a trot, easing back to a gentle walk when he was beside his 2 girls. Not so bad, is it? He asked. You do this for hours and hours each day? Susan asked. Sometimes. Every day is different, there are times I rarely get out of the garage. You like this? She asked. I love it. He looked over at his daughter, seeing the energy, the desire to do more, trot, gallop, become one with her horse. He chided himself for not getting her riding earlier. They were ranchers, 5 generations now. It was in their blood. He'd been a fool to deny it. Rich sat up in bed, listening. There, the crying, the sobbing, he thought it stopped. He closed his eyes, willing himself to sleep unsuccessfully. When the soft crying started again, he pulled the pillow over his head, trying to block it out. I'm sorry, he wept outside. Jonathan took another sip of the tepid coffee. 1 more hour, and his shift would end. He adjusted the earphones and listened to the scumsucker whining. He pressed the remote control, starting recording. Through the sound of a fire burning, he heard screaming. He gave the scumsucker 5 minutes and hit him with number 1, the miserable crying. That was a tough one. It sometimes gave him goosebumps, and he knew it was Diane on the recording. Jonathan, he reached over and put his arm around his wife's waist. Yes, baby? I need some money. I'm almost out of gas. Jonathan pulled his hand away abruptly. Get it from Lover Boy, please. I have an interview down at Jenkins's Hardware. I didn't know you were looking for a job, he said. I'm worried about our finances. Nancy can start kindergarten this year, and I can work while the kids are in school. You're not going to use the money to go see Lover Boy, are you? No, Jonathan, I promise. It's for gas so I can go on the interview and take care of our children. What if there was an emergency? I'm on empty. He pulled out his wallet and gave her 2 20s. I trust you. Please don't make a fool out of me. I wouldn't do that. I love you. You've done it before, Jonathan said coldly. She bowed her head. Why wouldn't Rich return her calls? Was he really seeing someone else? That picture of the 304 from his old office, coming out of his house, him hugging her, had he replaced her that quickly? They hadn't spoken in over a week. Jonathan looked at his paycheck. The 50% he received directly was barely a third of what he'd earned at his old job. It wouldn't even have been that much if Uncle Lin hadn't given him a raise when he took over maintenance of all the ranch vehicles. With the money that his grandfather secretly received, it wasn't much less than he'd earned previously, before the overtime. Uncle Lin was talking about him getting a share of the profits if he'd stay with the ranch. It was only 1% a year for the first 5 years, but that could be a nice little bonus. He'd be a partner, a minor one, but there was a certain pride that came with that. He'd never be a majority owner, that would fall on Lin's oldest. Although so far, Will hadn't shown an interest in taking over the family business. It was the way they did things, but his mother got 10% of the business profits, and if he stuck with it, that could be his one day as well. He hitched up his pants, thinking he'd have to buy some new ones soon. Second time he had to replace them, he didn't know what size his waist was, but he'd had to punch 2 new notches in his belt. All this field work was changing him. He joined the rest of the regular workers in a payday drink at the Spur and Saddle. Mikey, the giant of a man with the juvenile name, jabbed him in the ribs. That filly seems to have her eye on you. Jonathan looked over at the table where 3 women were seated. The cute little redhead was definitely giving him the eye. He got the bartender's attention. What are they drinking? He asked with a nod at the table. A pitcher of Shiner. I'll take one. The old bartender gave him a nod and a wink and placed the pitcher in front of him. He walked over to the table and stood beside the empty chair, offering it hand. Just so you know, I'm not Greek. The girls looked at each other in confusion until a smile popped up on the redhead's face. And you're bearing gifts? She asked. He gave her a wink, put the pitcher on the table, lifted the old one, topped off their glasses, and returned with it to the bar. The blonde was tapping him on the shoulder. A minute later, you're kidding, right? You're not even going to join us for a beer? I've sworn off beer, he explained. She gave a glance at his glass. Jonathan grinned. Haven't sworn off Jim Beam yet, so bring your Jim Beam over and keep us company. It was an enjoyable hour, well spent with pretty girls. He got 2 phone numbers out of it and 3 hugs, one with a nice little kiss. Maybe Grandpa was right, it was the easiest thing in the world. Susan's life was turning. She was the laughingstock of the town, ridiculed and insulted everywhere she turned. She had given up getting her fancy coffees and resorted to Dunkin' Donuts. It was all she could afford. She was waiting at the drive-thru when the old man brought her the coffee. He took one look at her and turned away from the window, walking around the corner for a second before returning with a smirk on his face. He handed it out the window. "1 Cheetah Special," he said, grinning. Her hand was trembling in anger when she took it. She noticed the lid was loose. She didn't want to think about what he'd done to it. She recalled the scene she'd made when complaining at McDonald's about the service. She'd been humiliated and laughed out of the store, the manager laughing as loud as any of them. She glared at the guy, opened the lid, and poured out the coffee. The scumbag smiled. Maybe you're not as stupid as they say. Rich was afraid of plugging his phone in. He never knew when his wife would call again, hounding him, blaming him for her pain and suffering. Logically, he knew it wasn't her, but when he was woken from his sleep by that whispering voice begging him to end the pain, all logic abandoned him. He could feel the eyes on him everywhere he went, judging him, blaming him, condemning him. It wasn't his fault. Why couldn't they understand? It was an accident. The little notes were the worst, tiny reminders in her careful handwriting. Remember that little bar? Do you still have that dress, the one I wore for our anniversary in Cancun, Richie? Remember Cancun? Why, Richie, why? Yes, he remembered it all. He opened the albums that Susan had hidden away, stealing his memories. How beautiful Heather had looked at the rail of the ship, hiking through the ruins. God, how he loved her, and now she was dead. His fault. He took another drink from the bottle, feeling the burn down his throat. She trusted him, and he'd failed her. He never meant to. It was an accident. Love, he mumbled, tears falling onto the pictures. Max, the judge, the colonel, and John sat, going over their notes. The colonel had his map out, colored dots showing each encounter over the last month. Think he's going to run soon? Hardly ever out in public anymore, John Crumb asked, looking over the latest entries. He'll break long before she does, stubborn she is, Max said. There was a hint of admiration in his statement. Maybe we should dial it back, give them both some time to realize how bad they've got it, the judge asked. Hell no, Max snapped. She wants to be stubborn, we crank it up. The judge shook his head. Judith's not going to be happy about this, he muttered. The others laughed. 52 years and you're still kidding with, John teased. At least I'm still getting some, he said. How's Rosie doing? All right enough, the colonel said. We got some calls to make, take it up a notch. Per scum sucker. Susan wiped her face in shock. That old woman had spit on her, spit in her face. She was sitting outside the coffee shop where they used to meet. It had been almost 2 weeks since she'd heard from him. She'd even gotten up the courage to go to his house, but he hadn't answered her knock. His car was there, he must have been around. She used her key and opened the door, but it was chained. Rich, she called out, Rich honey, it's me. No reply. The place had a sour smell to it, it looked dark. Maybe he was gone with that 304 from the picture, driving her car. How could he do that to her? What had she done wrong? She'd strolled down memory lane, going back to their coffee shop where they'd had those long, wonderful chats. She'd been sitting there, remembering his voice, his touch, lost in her recollections. The woman had hissed, walking by on the sidewalk just beyond the railing surrounding the drinking area. Susan had looked up just in time to feel the spittle land on her face. She had been in shock. She heard the whispers around her, the open laughter. She wiped her face with her napkin, tears trailing down her cheeks. How had her life turned so quickly? She'd had it all, a loving family, a good man, a young love, great sex. Now all she had were memories and the hate of everyone she knew. It wasn't fair. What had she done wrong? She couldn't help it, she never had wanted it, never sought it out. It was love, undeniable. It wasn't her fault. She looked up when a college-aged kid sat down across from her. He grinned cheekily, pretty lady like you shouldn't be crying. What do you say I buy you a drink? She shook her head, no thanks, I'm married. He shrugged, never heard that stopped you before. Come on, we'll get a drink or two, have a little fun. You're sure pretty fun. Is that all she was now? Please leave me alone, she said. He stood and leaned over. You change your mind, we'll be over at the Spur and Saddle. You ever been with 3 guys? We'll keep you going all night. Leave me alone, she shrieked at him. Geez lady, don't have a cow. Just figured a party girl might like to party. No hard feelings, all right? She lowered her face into her hands and didn't fight the tears. Jonathan watched his grandfather place the rope in his son's hands, showing him how to hold the loop open, how far down to hold the two ropes parallel, a foot or so from the Honda. The eye of the lariat, explaining how to coil it properly, how to hold your off hand. The pole sticking up out of the bale of hay was their target. It was his third try, swinging the rope at his side then over his head, learning the timing before casting. His arm forward quickly, the loop maintaining its shape as it fell over the pole. Both he and Susan clapped in appreciation, as did Cindy. Little Nancy was too busy rolling around with Grandpa's old work dog, Blue, a 12-year-old blue heeler, the ranch standard. He never remembered his grandfather not having at least one. They were working dogs and lived outdoors, but he had a soft spot for the suckers, and when they started limping, getting up slowly and awkwardly after sitting a spell, he didn't put them down. No, he couldn't do that, they were his friends, and nobody could ever say he wasn't loyal. They moved indoors, got old, fat, and spoiled, lived their days out with their one master, eager for the lightest touch, a single word of praise, always at his side. Their faithfulness rewarded. Grandpa reached down and squeezed Joey's shoulder. Jonathan remembered that touch, how good it made him feel, sloppy, but it's a start, as close to praise as he'd ever be likely to receive. One day he learned to treasure it. He felt Susan lean against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. "He's good with kids." "I never would have expected that," she said softly. "He always was. Some of the best days of my life were here with him and Dad. We had some great times, didn't we?" she said, her arm reaching around his waist. "It was so nice, together as a family, working with the kids, enjoying being outdoors." "We did. It's not too late, is it, to have more, as a family, as a husband and wife?" he shrugged. "I don't know, Susan. I honestly don't know." Rich stood in the reception area, pleading with the woman sitting there, "Please, I have to see her. She must have some time in her schedule." The silver-haired woman made a show of checking the calendar. "I'm sorry, Mr. Patton. Dr. Schaefer is booked solid. Maybe next week?" "Oh, I'm sorry. She's on vacation next week. Perhaps the week after that? You really should call ahead." "I've tried. You have to get me in." I don't know what I'm going to do." "I'm sorry, sir, that won't be possible for at least 2 weeks. Would you like to schedule an appointment for then? I can put you down for Thursday at 3:30 week after next. 5 minutes, that's all I need." 5 minutes, can she at least renew my prescriptions? She's very busy today, trying to get ready for her vacation. Why don't you go home, and I'll talk to her when I can. We'll give you a call if she can squeeze you in tomorrow before she leaves." Rich nodded slowly and turned to walk out the door, hunched over in defeat. "Slink away, you filthy wife-stealer," Ellen thought. She picked up the phone and called in the contact. Susan hung up the phone. She didn't know why she even tried, all she got was a busy signal anymore. He couldn't be on the phone that much. "Where is he now that I need him?" she thought. She'd sacrificed so much to help him, her time, her fidelity, her family, maybe even her marriage. She had come running anytime he called, now he was ignoring her. It wasn't fair. What Susan didn't know was that it was a simple matter to block her calls. The last time John Crumb was in the scumsucker's house, he picked up the phone, dialed number 60, and maneuvered the menus until both her home phone and cell phone numbers were blocked. Jonathan had done the same thing to their home phone and her cell phone, blocking the scumsucker's incoming calls. It would be a cold day in hell before they'd be calling each other on those phones. Jonathan jerked the reins to the side, heading off the stubborn old cow. He looked for some reason she'd shied away from the gate instead of following the rest of the herd to the new pasture. She turned and looked to be headed for the scrub. When Vincent, his cattle dog, nipped at her leg, turning her, he saw the tentative shifting of weight and figured she might have an injury. It took a good bit to get her where he needed, 2 ropes around her neck, and an hour of battle had her weary to the point where it seemed he might safely approach her. A job better handled by 2, but they were short that day. "You can handle it," Miguel found him there, treating the cut on her leg. Moving closer slowly, didn't want to spook her. "Dangerous alone," the old man said. "Didn't want her to get into the brush or turn up lame. Thought I'd have it taken care of an hour ago. Inexperienced." Jonathan checked over his work before giving a grudging nod. "You got this?" "Yes, sir. I'll have her through the gate within the hour. Lock it up behind you." Jonathan felt a pride in his work he hadn't felt for far too long. His shoulders ached, his hands were rubbed raw, and he would be lucky to get back before dark. He was happier than he had any right to be. He removed the ropes, talking softly, calming the cow. Vincent was laying down a couple of feet away, patiently. He rubbed the young dog's head, praising him for his work. "Good boy, Vincent," he smiled, recalling Joey picking out the name. His son thought the dog's hair color, a blue-black and gray mix, along with a largish light gray spot on his side, looked like Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. Jonathan didn't see it, but he was proud the boy even knew who Van Gogh was. Grandpa agreed that Vincent was a better name than Doc. She was wearing a filmy negligee, the outline of her red panties barely visible. She looked nervous as she handed him the drink. "Where are the kids?" Jonathan asked. "With your mother. Until morning, please don't be mad. We need some time alone." He could smell the steak from the broiler, he was starving. Then again, he always was of late, hard labor does that to a man. She pulled him over to his chair and struggled cutely to get his boots off. She landed on her, but when the second came free, and he had to laugh at the image of her, dressed for play, with his dusty boot in her hand, sitting on the floor with her legs spread, the tiny red bikini panties on display. She got up and called him to the dinner table. His plate had a large T-bone with a loaded baked potato, hers had a small fillet and some asparagus. One of the perks of working on a ranch, plenty of beef, all free. There was a piece of paper above his plate. He picked it up, and she said softly, "I'm clean. I haven't seen him since that night. I won't be with him anymore." He stood up and walked around the table, giving her a hug. "I'm sorry. I know this is difficult for you." She shook her head. "No, don't apologize. I'm sorry. I don't know how it happened. Please forgive me." He picked her up in his arms, and she squealed cutely. Jonathan carried her to their bedroom. "We'll reheat it." It had been almost 2 months since either of them had sex. Jonathan got carried away, a little bit, only moments after she'd managed to get his clothes off. She cried out for him. Jonathan leaned over her, staring down into the face of the woman who had betrayed him, choosing another over him. For a year, he'd screwed a 304 before Susan. Gazed upward into his hard eyes. "Forgive me," Jonathan said. Susan walked out of the back door of the ranch, looking for her kids. Her feet ached from standing all day, but she was back with her family now. She saw the group of men gathered in a circle inside the fence. She started rushing forward when she saw there was some kind of fighting going on. Lynk's wife, Grace, was leaning against the fence. She grabbed Susan's arm. "Leave him be." "What's going on?" Susan asked desperately. She spotted her son standing beside Jason Crum, one of the boys in Cindy's class. When Joey turned, she saw her son had a black eye and swollen lip. Strangely, he was grinning. "They're learning your boy some lessons on self-defense," Grace explained, hanging onto Susan's tense arm. "I don't want him fighting." "I don't imagine you want him getting his ass kicked." Susan was surprised to see her daughter, Cindy, walk out with a tray of drinks. The 10-year-old walked over and stopped in front of her brother, letting him choose first. Then she turned to Jason, blushing as she offered him one. "What's this all about?" Cindy would sooner kick Joey's bum than wait on him. "They fight like cats and dogs." Grace turned Susan over to the railing, her arm around her waist. He saved her bacon, fought for her, got his little but kicked for it, Susan gasped. He doesn't fight. We don't allow that. Good thing he did today. A couple of boys from school figured that since Cindy was her mother's daughter, she'd be easy. They fool around, caught her behind the bleachers, had her shirt off before your boy waded into them, little fists flying. That's how Jason tells it. He heard the shouting and found two of the little scum suckers holding Joey down and beating on him. There was no quit in him, though. He kept getting up, going back for more. Jason evened things up. They're just kids. Fighting doesn't solve anything. They should have gone to the teachers. Grace looked at her in disgust. Are you stupid? She'd be soiled goods by now if they went that route. The little a-holes would probably get lectured, maybe not even that. Sometimes a man's got to stand up for what's right, even if he only stands belt high. He could have gotten killed. Doesn't change things. You should be proud of him, sticking up for family, protecting sister like that. The men make sure he knows how to hold up his end in a fight. You leave the boy alone now, this is their world. Cindy walked over to where the two of them stood, leaning against the railing, watching. You all right, baby? Susan asked hesitantly. Her daughter replied absent-mindedly, her attention firmly focused on the crowd. Isn't he great, Mama? Her daughter's look of infatuation wasn't lost on her. Who, Cindy? Jason? The way he beat the tar out of those jerks, they'll never mess with me again, not as long as Jason and Joey are around. Susan didn't hear Max walking up behind her. Hell of a kid you raised, Susan. Whatever else anyone says about you, they can't take that away. You can be proud of your son, I know I am. She watched her boy get off the ground again, brushing his jeans off while one of the ranch hands lifted his arm up, showing him how to hold it. She wanted to run out there, hug him, hold him, protect him. She watched her little boy kick out with his boot and follow up with a big haymaker. He'd fought to protect his sister against older boys, 3-on-1, so much like his father. I am proud of him. Don't let him get hurt, Max, please. Max laughed. It ain't him you should be worried about. Boy's got sand, no quit in him, and what's over? Where's my husband? Why isn't he here? Irrigation problem, he probably doesn't even know what's going on yet. He'll be back soon enough, ranch don't shut down over one little fight. Susan recalled Grace's words about Cindy being her mother's daughter, easy, her reputation making her little girl a target. It wasn't fair, none of it was. Now the kids were suffering for it. Would her nightmare ever end? Oh God, this is going to be a bad one, Officer Banks said, holding a handkerchief up to his nose. His partner reached into his pocket and pulled out the Vicks, rubbing a little under each nostril. He passed the container to the younger guy, the kid would learn. They called out again, getting no reply. The house was a mess, paper scattered, dirty plates in the living room and kitchen. The smell was strongest from the back of the house. They followed it into a bedroom. Son of a witch, Banks gasped. That's seriously screwed up. The naked man was lying in a pile of photographs, some large, some small, letters scattered at his feet. The bottle of vodka, less than half full, and the empty prescription pill containers told them all they needed to know, that and the stench of death. The mirrors in the room had been broken, and they could see the dried blood on the guy's hands, where he must have hit them. Never could understand how a man could take his own life over some broad, Officer Gilroy said, shaking his head. He turned to his protege. Call it in, nothing else for us here. Jonathan sat with the Eagles, all of their gazes turned on him. Figured he'd run, not take the coward's way out, Grandpa said. Get away from that house and all the memories around here. It wasn't what I wanted, maybe he really was depressed, Jonathan shrugged. It does bother me, a scum sucker had it coming. Do you still want to go through with the rest? His grandfather asked. Carl Jenkins spoke up. She's doing a good job at the store, it'll be a shame to let her go. You and the family are all she talks about now. I don't know if it matters, but she sure seems like she loves you, Jonathan nodded. I believe she does, or as much as she can understand the concept. No, this doesn't change anything. She's back now, but who knows when she'll try that again. I want to move ahead, finish it. His grandfather reached out and gave his wrist a painful squeeze. Those old hands could crush walnuts, they could make paste out of his bones. Jonathan understood it was as close to a hug as he'd ever get. It's going to be hard on the kids, they're good, you know. Don't know how they ever came out of that witch, but they did. I know, Jonathan told them, I'm not going to lock her out of their lives, I just can't get past what she did for a year. Susan felt better about things, though she was still tired. Her world had collapsed more than 3 months ago. To be honest, it had been difficult and agonizing. Things were improving, the kids were healing and benefiting from their time on the ranch. For once, Jonathan arrived home early, however, the early morning showers prevented that from happening. Uncle Lynn sent him on his way, knowing it was going to be a big day for him. The house had gone into foreclosure when he noticed the for sale sign on the front lawn. They had 30 days to leave. Half the children's belongings had already been moved, slowly and quietly, into his grandfather's house, where they were put to sleep on weekends. He knew it would be difficult, they'd been informed. It shouldn't be, she was an awful cheating 304, but the pain was somewhat eased, though not sufficiently, by 11 years, 3 kids, and several months of penitence. After taking a shower, he put on his best shirt and fresh jeans. He trimmed his beard, checked himself in the mirror, and looked at his tanned face. He turned to see a different man who was both sadder and a better man overall. It was not what he had ever desired in life. Returning to the living room, he uncorked a bottle of her preferred wine and proceeded to pour 2 glasses. With the papers neatly stacked to the side, he set them down on the coffee table. For the second time, Jonathan moved them around. She is the one who did this, not me, he believed. All he had to do was think of her that first night, the way she talked to him, her great lover who understood her, threatening him, leaving their home, going to the bed of that scum sucker, leaving him in that excruciating pain. What sort of self-centered, evil witch would do that? Any doubts melted away when he remembered. He stood tensely as the door opened. Why is our house sporting a for sale sign, Jonathan? Are we heading somewhere? She approached, grasped her hand, and seated her. The word caught in his throat as he said, "BBE, there's something we have to talk about." She cast a quick glance at the table, the pair of wine glasses, and the pile of documents beside them. Glancing through the documents once more, she at last recognized the words "the original petition for divorce." She turned and searched for sadness or rage in his eyes. She perceived nothingness. Why, she questioned, shaky. Susan insisted, you cheated on me for a year. I agree to that. That's not how I was made. I apologize. Her breath was laboring and her hand was trembling. But you said you loved me, that you forgave me. I will always love you, I really do. For 9 amazing years, you were my first and only true love, the best wife a man could ask for, the mother of my lovely children, and an amazing mother. It's not enough, even though I do forgive you for everything. Jonathan, please don't do this. Divorce is not what you want. Things will become unattractive. I promise I'll fight it all the way through. My family is what I want. Divorce is not what I want. Done. Submitted. In a little while, the authorized process server will arrive to assist you. We have 30 days to vacate the premises. Grandpa has plenty of room for the kids, and you know they adore the ranch, so I'll take them over. I promise not to keep you from them. You will have joint custody and unrestricted access to them. You won't take my kids, I promise. Where are you going to live with my rights? How are you going to look after them in this place? I will not allow you to sell my house, I will keep them here. The house is owned by the bank and is in foreclosure, it is no longer ours. She tried to process what he had said as she looked at him in shock. Repossession? How? The mortgage hasn't been paid in 4 months. I no longer earn enough money. But that's not possible. How come I didn't know? Because I didn't want you to, she realized at that moment. He never meant to give her a chance, it had always been divorce. Everything was pre-arranged. How could you lie to me and lead me on like this for 4 months? How were you able to? I simply had to think back to the 2 years you deceived me, a year in which you made fun of our marriage by going to another man's bed and showing him your love and affection. Really, it was quite simple, she said, feeling her rage rising. You know the courts will give them to me, I'm still their mother. Jonathan, I'll make your life unbearable. If you take this action, you will never see them. He asked softly, where will you live, how will you take care of them? She thought there was little chance of that, so she said, I guess I'll go back to Rich, he'll take me in, he loves me, but he cut off all communication. Jonathan asked, his face showing concern, still, once she explained, you don't know. What? No, what? Rich is dead, suicide, overdose on sleeping pills. Susan heard the news and tried desperately not to believe it. She knew it to be true in her heart. She recalled how he was after she had left him the first time, saying, without her, he would have slipped back into his depression. It wasn't her fault, she made an effort to see and speak with him. She had never wanted to end things the way they had, by falling silent. God, had he already passed away? For what duration? Why was she the only one going? Was he given the same care she received? Oh no, there's no way in a million years that he could have survived that. He couldn't have been stronger without her at his side. That was it, maybe it was a lie. In an attempt to harm her the way she had hurt him, Jonathan was lying to her. Didn't it have to be a lie? Rich could not have died. Holding her, Jonathan waited for the trembling to subside, the glassy expression in her eyes, the lack of response. Susan, he repeated softly over and over. Susan's breathing eventually became calmer, and he felt her lean against him. She began to cry a little at first, then more. He drew her in and held her. She eventually exhaled, he is dead, isn't he? It's been 5 days. Sorry, I assumed you were aware. What should I do at this point? She whimpered pathetically. I'm guessing your parents will put you up for a while. You still look great, and you have your job. Someone will come along who is able to accept what I was unable to. I want the kids with me, so you can see them as much as you like, she remarked. I am aware that your parents are cramped. How you're going to afford a house big enough for the 4 of you is beyond me. Do you really want them living in 3 rooms together? She gave a head shake. Grandpa is quite spacious. When I'm not around, Miguel's niece will watch the kids and take care of the house. Even though your grandfather isn't pleased with you, he has given you unrestricted access to the home and the children. You could assist me, alimony and child support will make it feasible. I could pay $500, my annual income is currently less than $20,000. They have 10,000 acres of backyard and the run of a massive house, so it won't be enough. Granny will spoil them beyond belief, he adores them. Softly, what can you offer them? He inquired. She sobbed, they're my children. Indeed, they are and always will be. Jonathan, why can't we just go back to how things used to be? We adore one another, and the past few months have been amazing. I'm sorry, please don't punish me indefinitely. I'm sorry, I never meant for that to happen, she begged. I could never trust you again because I would constantly be concerned about when you would go into someone else's bed, return home smelling like you had had sex, and be filled to the brim with another man's seed. I don't want to, and I can't do it. It's time for you to move on too, I'm moving on now, he firmly stated. I know that I cannot. Without my family, I have no reason to live and will die. It would be difficult on the kids, so I really hope you don't. She questioned, don't you care? Obviously, I do, but sadly, it's insufficient. You were too complete and too thorough in your cheating. You broke me, he uttered. Hearing the condemnation in his words, she shuddered. And now you're going to destroy me? Yes, he tried to resist it, but his heart was not in it. She was damaged. Feeling betrayed by Jonathan for not giving her the children, her parents took her side. He made sure they understood they could see the kids whenever they wanted during a long, painful dinner. When Susan got herself together, she could have them all to herself. Together, they would figure out shared custody if she had the room for them. His grandfather's house was the setting for dinner, and the children seemed content there. They were amused by 3 new puppies. Cindy insisted on showing her grandparents her new horse and continued to ride every day. Wearing the same clothes as the ranch hands, Joey looked extremely proud as he wore his dusty boots and a small, tattered Stetson hat with curled edges. Nancy was content as a clam as she read to her great-grandfather, giving them time to converse. Nancy sat in his lap. Everyone knew she had him wrapped around her little finger. The sour old man had at last found his equal. They were content and at home. She was unable to accept that from them. She completed the paperwork and carried on with her depressingly filthy life. She made the same money as he did on paper, so there was no need for alimony. In addition to offering shared custody with him as the primary caregiver, he made no requests for child support. With the exception of a few pieces of furniture that Jonathan kept hidden until she needed them, they hardly had anything to divide. At the conclusion, he gave her a check for $1,120, which was half of their equity, 11 years at $112 a year. Susan's employment at Jenkins Hardware was terminated a week following the divorce decree. She was informed that money was tight and that she was among the new hires. Wondering what had become of her life, she lay in her childhood bed at home. She had everything, and now she had nothing, nothing at all. Jonathan's eye slid down to the gorgeous red hair that hung over his crotch. You'd have to give Gina the credit for her talent, because Aiden wasn't the best. However, you had to commend her for her effort, she was undoubtedly cooperative. He gave her a quick kiss on the lips, laid her down on the bed, and lifted her body into the air with more than enough savagery. Though his previous attempt had produced 2 rather spectacular orgasms, he was far from finished with the little firecracker. She squirmed and laughed, "Screw me already, you beast," as she attempted to pull him up the bed. The young beauty said, "Jesus, Jonathan, how did she ever give this up?" He dismissed the idea that during the first half of the year, he would have wilted and felt sorry for himself. Not now, not when he knew she was going to offer to stay over, he wasn't prepared for that. Though she was extremely attractive, her excessive drinking and lack of nurturing qualities were apparent. And that temper, not the ideal quality for a mother. Unlike Katie, the most affectionate of all of them thus far, sweet Katie. If only she could have occasionally kept her trap closed. Susan went to see her grandmother. They had tea together while sitting in the parlor. "You look awful, my dear," said Grandma Bridget. Susan mutely replied, "I know," unable to look her grandmother in the eye. She recalled the harsh remarks that insulted and condemned her. Even now, her grandfather refused to accept her existence. "Susan, it's been more than a year. You must let it go and carry on with your life. You're only 30 years old, 35, Grandma," the elderly woman chuckled. "A newborn. God, if only I could turn 35 again. Would you like to switch places?" "Not in a million years, sweetheart. Your grandfather deserves better than what I could ever do for him." "Am I that terrible?" "No, sweetie, what you did was awful. You're able to move past that," she said, sipping her tea. "Did you just come over for a visit, or did you want something?" Susan raised an eyebrow at the 66-year-old woman. She may know the answers. "Grandma, I want him back. I am aware of his loneliness. He dates, but not for a long time. Sunday dinner, I see the way he looks at me. Together, we were ideal. I was a fool, I threw everything away. I desire his return. I long to reunite with my family." "Dear, that's a lot to ask. You have done him a great injustice. You did everything in your power to undermine a man's sense of pride." "I am aware. Whatever needs to be done, I'll do. Do you believe it's feasible? Do I simply have dreams?" The elderly woman took a seat back and gave her daughter's child a broken look. Not even a semblance of the content girl she used to be. She was broken. Still 35 years old, nice figure, and attractive if she so desired. She could win his love just once. After paying the price, perhaps, just possibly, she had learned. It's going to be difficult, you know, getting him to fall back in love with you, Susan. The phrase, difficult but not impossible, made Susan sit up a bit. I swear to you, Grandma, whatever it takes. I will not refrain from anything. Please just tell me what needs to be done, anything at all. Gazing upwards at the mantel, Bridget saw the photo of herself alongside her four closest friends, cheerleaders from their high school days, the original Fab Five, all those years ago. Emma, who celebrated her 50th anniversary last month, and Josephine, who has been married for 10 years, are all now married. Peace be with Darren, her Jimmy was a good man. However, Darren had been exceptional and remarkable. Thankfully, he kept her secret until his death. She was still filled with excitement and shame over that wasted weekend. Even after graduating from high school 5 decades earlier, the five remained close friends and continued to draw attention. A teacup wouldn't be filled with what they didn't know about men. I'll make a few phone calls. There is a great deal of work ahead of us. You get it, listeners. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below. Additionally, remember to subscribe, like, and share.